Music fans had never seen anything like it. A mega concert on 2 continents with the world's biggest acts singing to save the world's hungriest children.
Please send your money in.
David Bowie refused to play Live Aid unless his set included a news clip of African famine. And as stadiums watched in stunned silence, the phone lines exploded.
After Live Aid, we got in today's money, the equivalent of about $480 million within a week.
And none of it would have happened without Bob Geldof.
We've been learning, and the lesson today is how to die.
The biggest hit of his Irish band, the Boomtown Rats, is a song about an American school shooting. But the images out of Ethiopia shook him deep.
I was just watching that Ethiopian thing. I think this is gross.
And since he was so plugged into the London scene, his urge to do something became Band-Aid. This inspired USA for Africa and We Are the World, which inspired Live Aid. And through it all, Geldof remained the profane conscience of rock and roll.
Don't go to the pub tonight, please. Stay in and give us the money. There are people dying now, so give me the money.
20 years later, Live 8 had megastars on 11 stages and their fans in the streets, all pressuring G8 leaders to relieve African debt. It worked, and today, his mission continues.
Where did your sense of justice come from, though? Bono says that you're what justice looks like when it loses its patience. But where is that fire? Because a lot of folks know the difference between right and wrong, but you take it to a global level.
Bono and I are very old mates. He'd come and look at this outfit from South Dublin in the basement of this hotel, and he's from North Dublin, and the divide in Dublin is north-south, north or south. It's not West Side Story, it's North Side Story. And I mean, in a nutshell, I think a lot of this comes from the conditions of your childhood, of course. So my mum died when I was very young, 7 or 8. My dad, the only job he could get, as I say, in this the nullity of the Irish economy, was leaving the house on Monday morning in his car, driving around rural Ireland, trying to sell towels, bits of rugs, coming home on Friday night. So there were 3 children, 2 sisters older than me and myself. We were left to our own devices. There was no money, because obviously there isn't much money in Ireland anyway, but particularly trying to sell towels around rural Ireland in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And of course now I know, my dad was heroic, really. He had no choice. I mean, he was a man without a woman and without money in the early 1960s. What could he do? There was no other alternative. He had to work. He had to pay for his kids' education. He paid for us both 3 to go to really good schools. But he had to leave on Monday, and he was away all week, and he'd be there on Fridays. I really grew to hate him, and he grew to hate me, and that got very bad in my youth. And I was the boy, the only boy, so the family repository of hope lay with me. He saw himself as a loser. I saw him as a loser. The last thing I was going to be was him. He wasn't a loser, as I say. He was heroic. No choice. My mum had no choice. She woke up at 40, died. And so that was it. And I suppose the sense, it sounds self-pitying, but I didn't feel like anything. I mean, a kid, they're the cards you're dealt with.
Please tell us, it's a beautiful sequence in the show, but you're, as you were saying, 30 years old, you'd had a bunch of hits over a decade, you see this news report.
Yeah.
And it grabs you in a way that you have to turn this feeling into action.
Yeah.
You were with Paula Yates at the time.
It's the same why I went back to... I could physically feel what those early rock and roll guys were doing. I could physically feel it. That's why I said when I heard Muddy Water that I could physically felt electrified, that here was a primal sense that was being somehow articulated. Then when I heard Dylan and Townsend and the Stones and the Beatles, here was being expressed brilliantly beyond just simply the feeling. It's brutal rock and roll. Intellectually, I'm all for it. Change, get out, you're done. But creatively, it's really hard, you know. So I came home from October, desperate to get on Top of the Pops. If you got on Top of the Pops, the whole country watched Top of the Pops. I really mean the whole country. You were in the charts. Once you were in the charts, they had to play on radio. You were out in the road, full houses. We'd been on Top of the Pops like practically every night for 10 years. You had to be in the top 40 to get into Top of the Pops. I couldn't get into the top 40 because they wouldn't play us, and I didn't have enough money to buy us into the top 40, you know. So I came home. I thought, it's not bad. We've got a sold-out tour January. The album's coming out November. Got another couple of singles. The tickets had gone great on the tour. But still, I just had my first little baby girl. I came home down, foggy, cold, London, October evening. A measure of how great we were not doing was the fact I was home in the evening. You're in a rock and roll outfit, dude. You're away, you're on tour, you're doing promo, you're recording, whatever. You ain't at home at 6. I was. Mm-hmm. Came home, there was my missus, sat down beside her on the sofa, you know, trying, everything's great, you know. I just had this new little family. I'm fucked. What am I going to do if this all collapses? In that mood, and with our little baby girl in between us, I hit the 6 o'clock news. Again, very odd for people to understand in the age of social media where news is largely, you know, chewed up through your phone or whatever. This was mono media essentially two channels. Probably there was maybe 3 or 4, but essentially 2, ITV, BBC. Everyone was home at 6 after work. Everyone watched the BBC for news because it was journalism and it was truth, more or less. For whatever reason, and it was because of the brilliance of the journalistic report and the appalling thing the journalist was telling us, BBC gave it a huge slot, I want to say 8 minutes, in a half-hour section at the top of the news. And I remember it vividly, and that's because I guess I've seen it now so often, and quite rightly Burke has won every journalistic award. But what I remember is, aside from the appalling images, I remember his words. He talked, and the anger was so clear in his voice. He didn't shout. He had a very posh English voice. And he just lays it out in les mots justes, in the perfect words to tell you what he felt and saw. It wasn't about him, it was about us. He articulated exquisitely rage, shame, anger, disgust at what we were allowing to happen to fellow human beings. Didn't matter that they were black, lime green, whether it was in Africa or Yorkshire or Iowa. Look at this. Right now, right here, right now, these elegant human beings, all that intellect, all that possibility, dying of hunger in biblical numbers. That's what he said, a biblical famine of biblical proportions. That image, that a grotesque image of an infant and the father looking directly at the camera, not with resignation, not seeking your pity, but just staring us down. And my partner began to cry, not sob. I looked around to see, and she had just tears, and she grabbed our baby and ran upstairs, almost as if she didn't want this infant to see the world that she was going to be in. Something like that. I don't want to, yes, but I do want to dramatize it because it had such an effect on both of us. And I was riveted. I was riveted by the pornography of poverty, the prurience, the necessity to show you it. The NGOs, the aid agencies will say, oh, no, we mustn't show this, we mustn't do that. It's saying, no, show it. Show it what we're doing. To die of starvation, to die of lack of food in a world of surplus food, to die of want in a world of surplus is not only economically illiterate, it is intellectually absurd, and it is, of course, morally repulsive. And whilst I couldn't really atomize my thought into that coherence at that time, I just thought, no. You know, I mean, I don't remember anything else on the news that night. So the next morning I got up and Paula had put a note on the kitchen table in a bowl saying anyone who comes to this house has to put £1 or £5 into this bowl. I thought, yeah, that's good. But this is so grotesque. This requires something of the self, I think. And all I could do was write tunes. I could work in an abattoir, or I could write tunes. And but if I wrote a tune, it wasn't guaranteed to be a hit anymore. And we had so little time before Christmas. Christmas was important. Christmas back in the day of physical record sales was the time, certainly in the UK, when everyone bought a record to give as a present to someone else. So that was the big moment. So this was late October. So hold on. I thought I'd call Paula. She'd left because she was the host of the go-to rock and roll show of the 80s called The Tube. And it came out in Newcastle in the north of England. She was already in Newcastle. I called her. I said, who's on the show? Rats had done the show a few times, but it was all the kids I just talked about, Ultravox, etc., etc. Ultravox were on. She was talking to Midge Ure, the great songwriter, Vienna, etc., etc. He was our friend. They all were, because we all knew them for The Tube. So I said to Midge, did you see that thing last night? Now, it had bothered me. There's a piece of film, I don't know if it's in your documentary.
I saw it. You were at a cocktail party, and you were repulsed by the cocktail wieners.
I couldn't believe that. I didn't know this shit. I didn't know till I'd seen your doc. And I said, what? I had to go to some schmooze fest. And it was only, I said, what was it? And they said, Peter York's book. I knew Peter York. He was a sort of style writer, very like Grayson Carter and Vanity Fair or something. And he had identified, like Tom Wolfe's social x-rays, he had discovered a social type called Sloane Rangers. Diana Spencer, Princess Diana, would be the archetypal slow ranger. You know, posh girls, with nothing really to do, no great skills. Ideally, they'd wear a shirt up like this and pearls around their neck. Yeah. And he'd written this book, Sloane Range. So to support Peter and, you know, go along with the shtick, very 80s, I went to this thing. And I could not get my head around from what I'd seen to where I was. It didn't seem obscene, it didn't seem grotesque, it just was out of kilter with me. And I kept boring people as the film says, did you see that thing last night, you know? So the next morning, I called Paul at the Tube, Midge is there. I said, did you see that thing last night? He said, no, and I described it to him. He said, well, what do you want to do? I said, let's make a record. I didn't ask him, did he want to be involved? I just said, let's make a record. And he said, okay. And he said, well, we don't have time. I said, look, I honestly think if we push, we can get to 2 weeks, 10 days before Christmas, £100,000. We give it to Oxfam. £100,000 is a lot in those days. Give it to Oxfam, it's the most we can do. He said, yeah, okay. He said, what do you want to make? And I said, I don't know, we just pick something like a Dylan song or something appropriate, Lennon, you know. I knew it had to be it had to be something like Give Peace a Chance, something, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, something clear.
A call to action?
Not a call to action, there's a word for it which I've often used. Anyway, I'll come to it.
Yeah.
You know, age.
You had me fooled.
And he said, well, he said, no. He said, let's write something. You see, I hadn't been having a hit. So I didn't really have the confidence to say, I'll write something and we'll all record it, you know. And he said, do it. So I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, I'll come up with something you could. He just assumed I'm another songwriter. Just, what are we doing messing around trying to pick a song? Let's go, it's easy.
Right.
You know, write songwriter, just pick it out the air. So I said, well, it can't be just you and me. Ultravox and the Boomtown Rats. It's cool, but it's not. I said, I'll ring around. Okay. So he sent me a cassette. Remember cassettes? He sent me a cassette, and there was a little riff, do 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 do, and he rang me. He said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "Dude, it's great, but it's the theme from Z Cars. Z Cars was a 1960s, 70s cop show, you know." And he said, "It's better than any shite you could write because he's Scottish." And I said, "That may be so, but it's Z Cars, you know." Yeah. So I left the house. I lived in Chelsea, and I walked up about a couple hundred yards to the King's Road where the 60s came out of, where punk came out of. And on the corner was an antique shop, Prushkin Art Gallery. And I saw Gary Kemp from Spandau Ballet there, you know. And like, so he just had huge hits, and he's a great guy. And so I banged on the window watching him spend the first flush of his rock star money. And like Gary looked up from, you know, picking the worst antique, you know, somebody like, and he looked up and he saw me and I went like that at him. And he looked at the window and went, because we're very sophisticated in rock and roll, you know. Yeah. And he came out and I said, you were doing this thing. And I said, you know, you have to be in it. And he said, well, we're in Japan at the time. And I said, dude, we need everyone. And he said, fuck it. He said, we'll come back for it. Like, you know, these young tyros flew back from Japan to do this record. And this is true. I walked down about another 60 yards to the Picasso Cafe where I had my morning coffee. I did my meetings, there's booths. And I'd seen Clapton having his breakfast in there, and the great football player George Best. I did drunk now, but I had a breakfast with him. That was cool. Clapton had lived exactly opposite with Hendrix in a flat exactly opposite the Picasso in the 60s. Yeah. Coming up the road was Sting, as you do.
As it happens.
Yeah. Sting and I go back to when we were literally before we'd got a deal. We were all living in one house in the suburbs of London, way out. And one night I'd walked up to the local shit studio, about a mile and a half, we were rehearsing. There was a ballroom in the house we all rented. Crew, band, transient girlfriends, wives, etc. Yeah. And to get a break, I walked up and there was this 3-piece outfit with the singer guy had blonde hair, and I thought, yeah, you know, trying to get in on the punk action. And then he opened his mouth and I thought, fucking hell, wow, he's good. He's good. And so since that time, that was long before his first record, I think we'd made ours. So we were old friends, still are. And he came up the road and we'd done Amnesty gigs together. And so I said, we're doing this. He said, yeah, I'm in. I said, so we sat and had a coffee. And then I called Simon Le Bon. Le Bon said yes. So by the end of the day, we had the Rats, Ultravox, Spandau Ballet, the Police, and probably Duran Duran. Yeah. It was done. And everybody else came in.
At the end, 3 dozen different.
I don't know. There was this new crowd out of Dublin called U2. They just supported the Police. I rang this kid who'd been picking his nose looking at us in the basement of a hotel in Ireland. You know, I talked to him once or twice. And I said, do you want to do this thing? And he was Bono always takes 3 days to work out if it's cool, it's not cool, does this work, does this not? So I waited the 3 days. I said, dude, do you want to do it or not? I don't care. I was giving this guy a leg up. He doesn't seem to understand that. So then that happens. I don't know if you've watched, I haven't, the making of documentary. And then you watch USA for Africa. The difference is fantastic. One is America and the giants of our culture, and the other is this amateurs, these kids just out of school squeezing their spots, boy, Duran, like trying to cover up his spots,
But USA for Africa wouldn't have happened without you guys.
No, I mean,
You
it
showed 'em.
happens, it becomes a phenomenon, and why it was a phenomenon was because, I wrote the words I had to go to Midges to work out the song. I stopped off at my friend's house. He was sick. He's a Lithuanian sculptor, a mad guy. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going up to Midge. We're going to do this song. I wrote the words in a cab. And I had a song the Rats didn't like called It's My World. And I think it began, it's my world, and there's no need to be afraid. And I thought, that was in my head. And I just wrote, it's Christmas time. There's no need to be afraid. Once I had that, and it had to be obvious, as I said to you, it had to be almost like early Dylan, early Lennon, had to be quite clear what we were saying, the dichotomy between the cornucopia of the West, everything. We had everything at Christmas. Christmas, we have a feast. They have nothing. We give each other tokens of affection. We put aside the family dramas and anxieties, and we steel ourselves for sitting down together at Christmas. We can't wait to get away, but we do it. We show fellow feeling. We display an acknowledgement of each other and a grace towards each other. And then outside that window, very close, 8 miles from almost where we're sitting now, 8 miles is the poorest continent in the world. 8 miles separates the richest continent in the world, Europe, and the poorest. 8 miles. And in that narrow gap is all our baleful past and all our inevitable future. And the Romans had it down. Carthage and Rome were equals. Trade between Egypt and Rome was huge. It was the great trading bloc. So why not again? So, you make up that boringly obvious lyric. And it's very hard. It's very hard to understand in our world an absolute of nothing. But that's what Michael Burke had showed us in the BBC report. Nothing, and so you die. And they all came. I shouted at Boy George because he was asleep in New York. And he said, oh, Bob, and I said, get on a plane. There's a Concorde at 3 o'clock. And he got, bloody hell. So George stumbles out of the plaza, gets a cab to JFK, gets on a Concorde, and stumbles into the recording at 6 p.m. Back to the Future. That's when you could do that stuff. And of course it becomes, why didn't we think of this, a phenomenon? Because everyone had seen that news, everyone. It's the 6 o'clock BBC News. I hadn't thought of that. Everyone felt the shame, the disgust, the rage, and the frustration of not being able to do something. It isn't enough just to find a charity box and do that. And so that Christmas, that 7-inch piece of plastic became the price of a life. And they understood that.